Well, hello. I'm here to introduce you to this, the violin, or as I will henceforth call it, the fiddle. And also introduce you to this stick, which I shall be referring to by its name, which happens to be the bow. Now, I'll admit to you from the start that there are easier instruments to play than the violin if you want an easy life. For instance, the kazoo offers far less of a challenge. But if you don't mind putting in a bit of a hard work and a bit of practice, which of course all instruments need, the fiddle is a tremendously versatile instrument that can be used for all sorts of different styles. For folk, as in... and sort of jazz and rock and blues, for instance. I nearly freaked out then. You see the effect it has on me. You can also play classical music on it, which is the music probably most associated with the violin, as in... You notice I went all serene while I was playing that. This particular violin that I'm playing was made in 1793. I can't actually afford a new one. And you'll notice that it has a small appliance on it, which is a pickup, which means you can play it amplified, which enables you to play with those hooligans, guitarists, electric guitarists, synthesizer players, drummers, bass players, people like that who like to play very loud, so the fiddle can strike back. You can even get sort of fully solid electric fiddles. But this one is a straightforward acoustic fiddle fitted with a pickup, which I'll be demonstrating a bit later. Firstly, though, if you decide that you're going to be a fiddler, the first thing you have to do is acquire one. So, where do you get your fiddle from? Now, the obvious way to acquire it, of course, is to go and buy it from a shop. If you choose this course of action, I'd strongly recommend that you go to a shop that's got a large sign outside it, or a medium-sized sign, or even a quite small one, providing it's nicely presented, that says violins and cellos. That is a shop that specialises in those instruments, because it's a very specialised area. Whatever instrument you buy, whatever price range you decide to buy it in, it's very important that the instrument is set up well, makes it possible to play. I've seen many school instruments that have been so badly set up that I don't know how the kids could have played them at all. They'd be handy for grating cheese, but let me show you. This is a reasonably cheap fiddle. It hasn't been set up yet, as you can hear. What you need to do to a fiddle to make it playable is you have to have the bridge fitted to the right, so that the strings are the right height above the fingerboard. The curvature of the bridge has to be correct. And you can use many different sorts of strings on a fiddle. There are strings made of gut, there are strings made of metal, there are strings made of nylon. The ones that I'd suggest you head for are the metal strings, because they last longer and they hold their tuning very well. They have a higher tension than the gut strings, so you do need to have these small string adjusters fitted to the tailpiece. This is the tailpiece here. With the pegs, as I've said, it's important that they're fitted well, but you can also get a remarkable little tube of stuff called peg paste. This is incredible. This, if your pegs are sticking, it makes them move more easily, but if they're slipping, it makes them hold better, it makes them stick better. I don't know how they do it. The only thing to bear in mind, of course, with this is don't get it mixed up with that stuff you put on chapped lips, because it tastes horrible. I've done that myself, you know. Now, the other way to get a violin, apart from just going and buying one, is if you're lucky enough to be given one, or maybe find one in your loft or attic. There's hundreds of fiddles lying around the country, been probably covered in dust for years and years. I, in fact, got my first fiddle from my granny, who'd had it lying around for years, and nobody in the family played it. So that was a stroke of luck. But again, it was in a pretty unplayable condition. So if you do acquire a fiddle like this, the thing to do is to go to the violin dealer, the specialist, and ask him to set it up for you, to do the bridge, the strings, all the things that we've gone over. So you've got an instrument that's playable. Of course, the other thing that you'll need is the bow. So we'll move on to the bow now. Here we have the bow. Very much important, as important for the sound as the fiddle is. The bow consists of many, many strands of horsehair. This is horse's hair here, I don't know if you can see that. Probably about 200 strands, I haven't counted them recently. And the way that the sound comes out of the fiddle is you take stuff called resin, or sometimes rosin, it has two names for some reason which escapes me. That's a block of resin, which is sort of adhesive, it's sticky, and you rub the bow with the resin, which gives the hair adhesion, and so when you draw it across the strings, you get the violin sound. A thing to remember that it is very important when looking after your bow is that it is tensioned. You have a screw at the end here which tensions the stick. And because the quality of the bow depends on it having a good spring to it, at the end of playing you should always untension the bow like this. So when it's left in the case, the hair is just flapping about, putting no tension on the stick. And then when you're ready to play it, you just wind it up. And now you're ready to start thinking about playing the thing. So, we're almost, but not quite, ready to start thinking about actually playing notes. Firstly, we have to get over the problem of holding the fiddle. Now, there are two accessories to aid you in this. One being this, the chin rest, which stays attached to the fiddle all the time. The other, on the reverse side, is this thing, which is called a shoulder rest. This is detachable. You have to take it off, actually, because otherwise the fiddle wouldn't fit in the case. Also, both the chin rest and the shoulder rest come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, different brands, different designs, and it's very simply down to finding the combination that feels most comfortable for you. For this, you have to go back to the shop again. You're by now on first-name terms with the chap behind the counter, and so he'll be quite happy to let you try out endless combinations, and you can find which is the most comfortable. I have to say at this point that not everybody uses a shoulder rest. In the history of the fiddle, this is a comparatively modern innovation, comparatively. If you're, for instance, blessed with a particularly short neck and a fondness for wearing padded jackets, you won't need it. But most people use it. The idea of it, very simply, is that it enables you to hold the fiddle in a nice relaxed way without having to use your left arm to support any of the weight. So you see, no hands. And you can just sort of sit here all day. I often do this, as it happens. Have a cup of tea, watch TV, just sit there. See, quite relaxed. So this hand is completely free to not have to worry about supporting the weight of the fiddle. As far as the position of the left hand goes, there we are. That's the position. With the wrist straight. That's the sort of standard, if you want, classical position. Again, I have to say that many great players, especially on the folk and country and western scene, play with the flat wrist. I've seen some fantastic players playing with the hand in that position. So I'd be wrong to say that this is the only way to play. It depends on the style of music you're playing, how comfortable you feel with it, or whatever. But that's the position that I'd recommend. So there we are, nice and relaxed. And then you're ready to start thinking about the bow. You'll be needing the bow. So how do we hold the bow? This part of the bow here, for reasons which are beyond me, this is called the frog. And you hold the bow by just tucking the thumb gently into that little indent in the frog. The other fingers fit in a hopefully relaxed way over the top of the stick. The little finger is especially useful because it kind of helps you balance the bow. You can actually sense the weight of the bow using the little finger. You don't necessarily have to keep the little finger on the stick all the time. Sometimes it will find its way loose, but that's the basic way of holding the bow. Again, I've seen many great players, many great folk players who hold the stick like this. In fact, it's when I started years ago playing folk music. I was self-taught, and for quite a long time I held the stick like that. And there are some fabulous players who hold it like that. But again, I'd recommend the standard way of holding it, which is like that. So we have the bow, we have the fiddle, and we're ready to start playing. Before we do that, just a brief note about keeping the instrument in good order. Because you saw me earlier put resin on the bow hair, the resin, as you bow the fiddle, the dust, resin dust, comes off and accumulates underneath the strings. So it's a good idea if after each time that you've played, if you just get a duster and just wipe it over like that. If you don't do that, the resin will accumulate under there over the weeks and months and years, and it sort of turns into a horrible sticky gunge. In fact, it's quite often when you see old fiddles like those ones I was telling you about that you might find in your loft, you'll quite often find that they've got a sort of black gungy mark around there, which isn't too attractive. But there are various miracle preparations that you can purchase from the shop which you're now spending most of your life in, to clean that off. But providing you just dust it regularly, you shouldn't be any problem. So now we're about to play a note on the fiddle. Now you wouldn't believe how incredibly close we are now getting to actually playing some notes on the fiddle, but there is one annoying little thing that we've got to get out of the way first, which is tuning it, getting the fiddle in tune. Now the fiddle, as you can see, has 4 strings. The strings are tuned a fifth apart. It's a very symmetrical instrument, which is a nice thing about it. By saying that they're tuned a fifth apart, I mean that if you play the bottom string and count 5 notes up, it gets you to the next string. So the bottom string is a G. Count 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th note is the next string up, which is a D. Same thing again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you arrive at A. 1 more to go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you've hit the top string, which is an E. Now it's useful to know where these notes lie on a piano keyboard. Maybe you've got a piano at home. First of all, you have to find middle C on the keyboard. Now if you're not at all familiar with the keyboard, get somebody to show you. So middle C, it's this note here. Now if we count, including that note, 4 notes down, 1, 2, 3, 4, we get the bottom note of the fiddle, the G. Count 5 notes up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we get the D. Same thing again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gets us to A. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gets us to E. So the open strings on the fiddle, just one more time, are G, D, A, and E. There you have them. Now, obviously, the piano isn't the easiest thing to carry around with you to tune the fiddle up. It's very awkward, for instance, to get on buses. I've tried this. And there are more convenient devices for tuning. For instance, this. This is one of the many electronic tuners that's on the market. They're very good. They're designed really for electric guitars and synthesizers and basses and stuff. But certain models work equally well with all instruments, and they're very good. They automatically tell you which note you're playing, and when the needle is in the center and when the lights flash, you know that you're in tune. But they are quite expensive, and so probably for starters you want something cheaper and easier to tune up with. This is about the most basic thing you can tune up with. It's a tuning fork, and it usually gives you the note A. I mean, you can get tuning forks to all sorts of different notes, but fiddle players usually use the A to tune up to. So all you have to do to get a sound out of it is hit something convenient, like a friend, a knee, for instance. Oh, and then hold it against the top of the bridge. And if you listen carefully, you'll be able to hear the note resonating through the body of the fiddle. That's the A. So you can tune to that. But perhaps the very easiest way to tune the fiddle is to acquire a set of these, which are pitch pipes, and you can get these from the shop. They give you the exact notes that you need. You just blow them and they give you the notes that you need. Very useful for making train noises as well. And if you decide by this time that the fiddle isn't for you, you've got the basic groundwork for a career as a harmonica player. Now, how to actually tune it physically. Whatever you're using, be it your pitch pipes or your tuning fork, first you tune it roughly using the peg. So let's detune this string. See what... So for convenience, I'll use the piano now. And that's the note I want. So that's got it pretty close with the peg. You can finely adjust it using the fine adjuster. And there's no real way around saying that for tuning a fiddle, you have to use your ears. You have to get used to the sound of those open strings. If you have difficulty, ask the fellow in the shop, because by now, let's face it, you'll probably have been out for a few drinks with him, you've probably mixed socially quite often, met his wife and stuff, so he'll be more than glad to help you tune the fiddle, because it can be quite tricky at first. And again, I keep making the point that it's very important that the fiddle is set up correctly, because if you've got pegs which don't turn very well, it's so much more difficult to tune the fiddle. So now we're getting to the point where for the first time we can put bow to string. So we get the bow, make sure that it's tensioned, not too much. It's about right. There are two types of bow stroke, a down bow and an up bow. Now, a down bow starts at the end, we've told you that this is called the frog. A down bow starts at that end. An up bow, as you've probably worked out by now, if you're one step ahead of me, starts at the other end. So first, the basic thing to do is to just gently play the open strings. Using down bows, just use down bows at first. And you don't have to use too much pressure. If you use too much pressure, you get that sort of noise. So let the weight of the bow do the work for you, really. So we'll just play the open strings. Don't worry about this hand at all. Just rest it here, or if you still find it useful to just support a little bit of the weight, that's okay if you haven't got used to holding it with no hands yet. And just play the open strings. Firstly the G. Then the D. Then the A. And then the E. Now you'll find a tendency with bowing, especially this is on the down bows, you'll find a tendency to find your arm going round the corner a bit, coming this way. This is to be avoided because it doesn't make good contact with the strings. So what we're trying to do is keep the bow at right angles to the body of the instrument. So this kind of means that you have to push the frog, push this hand forward from your body a bit. So accentuate that movement, and that should keep it pretty much at right angles, which is what you're heading for. And you can even practice that in front of a mirror to check how you're doing. After you've tried just down strokes playing the open strings, try alternate down bows and up bows. Of course, one of the difficulties with the fiddle is separating the strings. Again, this is why it's important that the bridge is being set right, that the curvature is correct, so that you can separate easily the strings without hitting the adjacent strings. So you don't get... You just get the single string. Of course, then you can try playing two strings at once. And by this time, you're doing pretty well because you're already at just about the point when you can start a country and western group, because you can now go and you're off. Okay, so we're just about ready now to play our first tune, using just the open strings of the fiddle. But before we do that, I think it's worth mentioning a bit about music notation, because from now on you'll be seeing appearing on the screen the music, the written music for the tunes that we're playing. Now, there's not enough time to go into the mechanics of music theory. There's lots of great books on it, and I strongly suggest that you go out and find a book that explains music theory. It has to be said as well that it's not absolutely necessary to worry too much, especially at this stage, if you can't read music. Some people find it a bit of a barrier, having music written out. It can seem a bit complicated. It sometimes seems to make the music more complicated than it actually is. So don't worry about it. It's a great thing to do. I'd really recommend being able to read music. For a start off, you can go out and get wonderful books of folk tunes. You can get a great book called O'Neill's, about 1,000 Irish folk tunes, which are pretty straightforward to read. So it enables you to sort of delve into different worlds of music. So it's to be recommended, but don't worry if you find it a bit of a barrier at first. Don't worry about it. Just use your ears, and that'll get you through fine. So let's go with the first tune using the open strings of the fiddle. Now, we'll try it first, just plucking the fiddle, or the flash name for it, pizzicato. So, the way that we pluck the fiddle, take the thumb and put it on the corner of the fingerboard here. And use this finger to pluck the strings. Now, don't pluck them where you would bow them. Because if you think about it, there's a deposit of resin on the strings here that will just make your fingers sticky. So you don't want to get your fingers near that bit. It'll also put grease from your fingers on the strings, which makes the bow not adhere so well to the strings. So you're putting your thumb here and you're plucking here. So here's a very straightforward tune, just using the open strings. Bit staccato. Now, you can play that at any speed. I played it at a sort of medium tempo there. If you want to try it a bit slower, you can just play. And just build up the tempo until you can find yourself doing. Now, the same tune, but let's try it with the bow. Now here we're going to start with a downstroke of the bow, and it's just going to be alternate downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke. Now in music notation there are two little signs for downstrokes and upstrokes of the bow. The down bow is signified by a shape like that, which you'll see on the screen, and an up bow simply by that shape. Right, so let's try playing very slowly, with alternate bow strokes, the same tune. And now, the same as you did when you were playing it plucked, try it a little faster. And also you can just make up your own variations. Just practice playing alternate strings. You just pick them out at random. You can do that for hours. And so the time has come to think about using the fingers on the left hand for the first time. And we're going to learn a scale. A scale being a pattern of notes from which you can construct tunes. It's pretty much the easiest way to explain it. We're going to learn the scale of D major. And D major occupies in its one octave form, and by one octave I mean just 8 notes. Scales can be, as you can imagine, of different lengths. This is just a 1-octave scale, 8 notes, and it occupies just the centre 2 strings of the fiddle, the D string and the A string. Now I'll play it to you first. You'll recognise immediately what type of scale it is. It's the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do thing. So that's the scale of D major. Now you'll notice that I just used fingers 1, 2 and 3. Don't worry about the 4th finger at this stage, because the 4th finger is a lot weaker than the other fingers. It's a lot more difficult to use. But in first position, by which I mean the position where you're not moving up and down the neck of the fiddle way up here, you're just downstairs, the first 3 fingers will get you by for at least 1,000,000 tunes, so that's quite a lot to be going on with. So don't worry about that 4th finger for now. So let me show you where to position the fingers. And on the fiddle, you don't have any of the advantages that you get on other instruments like keyboard instruments or fretted instruments, the guitars and mandolins, where they have the metal bars across to actually mark and dictate what the note is. The fiddle, you have to make the pitch of the note completely by using your ear. In that way, it's often been said, in fact, that the fiddle is perhaps the closest sound instrumentally to the human voice. So you can just slide around all over the place. So this gives you great scope for expression, but of course it means that you have to constantly use your ears to make sure that the note that you're playing is in tune. So let's see where the fingers go to play this scale, this 1-octave scale of D major. The first note is the open string itself, the open D. The next note is E, which is the first finger here pressed down about there. I have to say about there because, as I stressed before, you have to use your ears to see if it sounds in tune or not. When you're pressing your fingers down, try and avoid pressing down too hard. Don't squeeze the fiddle. Try and be gentle with it. I think that's something that most instruments share, is the fact that the more relaxed the muscles that you're using to play the instrument are, the easier it is to play. So we're just using very gentle pressure, because on the fiddle you don't have to use a lot of strength to press the strings down. There's not a great deal of tension involved, and if the fiddle, again, harking back to it being well set up, if the strings aren't too high off the fingerboard, you shouldn't have to use too much pressure, so it's nice and relaxed. So, the first note, a D. The second note, first finger down, an E. Sounds like this. The third note is an F sharp and is the second finger pressed down here. Now you'll notice that when I press the second finger down, I don't lift the first finger off. So we don't go like this. That's kind of a waste of energy. Keep the fingers down. We've got the first 3 notes of the scale. So you can see the spacing of the fingers there. The third finger that's going down is going to be close to the second finger, so you can see the configuration of the fingers. So again, keeping the second finger and the first finger down while you're playing the third finger, we have now these notes. D, E, F sharp, and G. So there you are, that's the first notes of the D major scale on the D string. We'll just do those again, and before moving on, it's just wise to practice those notes up and down, slowly as you like. And back down. Gradually speed it up. And always using alternate bow strokes, down, up, down, up. So we're halfway through the scale. The next note after the third finger on the D string, which is the note G, is the open A string. Take the fingers off, and you do exactly the same configuration, exactly the same pattern, but one string up on the A string, giving us the notes A, B, C sharp, and D. A, B, C sharp, and D. So the whole scale, open D string, first finger E, second finger F sharp, third finger G, open A string, first finger B, second finger C sharp, third finger D, which is one octave above the note that you started at. It's in fact the same note, but just one octave higher. You can hear that they're just the same note, an octave apart. So let's try now putting the whole scale together, very slowly, keeping the fingers down as we play it. And then back down. Now when you play the scale slowly, try and use as much of the bow length as you can to get the full length of the bow in. Because by using the full length of the bow and keeping it going at a reasonable speed enables you to get a nice tone, a nice sonority out of the instrument, which is of course one of the very most important things about the fiddle, is to be able to get a good sound and an individual sound indeed. When you're playing faster, of course, you use shorter bow strokes, either in the center or sometimes towards this end of the bow. But still keeping a nice even speed that the bow moves across the strings. So there we have the scale of D major. Now scales are they're pretty boring things to practice really, but they're just very necessary. Until you've got the scale patterns together, you're not really in a position to start on the real fun of music, which is playing tunes. So now what we're going to do is put together a tune, a very straightforward tune, using the notes of the one octave scale of D major. And the tune goes like this. Firstly, really slowly. Very straightforward little tune. You'll notice then that a bit of vibrato crept in as I was playing. Now what vibrato is the wobbling of the note to give it expression. And to bring out of the tone out of the instrument. When you've been playing for a long time, you get used to playing vibrato. It actually is quite difficult to play without using it. But of course, at the stage that you're at the moment, you'll find it difficult to play with it. So we'll deal with vibrato later on. For now, we're just dealing with the notes played very plainly and are just thinking about getting the fingers in the right place, getting the pressure of them right and relaxed, and keeping the fingers down. So let's just do that tune again, this time a little faster. And now that you've got those 8 notes to play with, I suggest that straight away you start just making up your own patterns, making up your own little tunes, maybe any particular favourite tunes that you have, maybe a favourite theme tune from TV or whatever, any tune that you think you can play using those 8 notes, and there's plenty of them, just try it, or just play around with the feeling of just moving between those 8 notes that you've got. Again, you can go on endlessly doing that, but it'll just give you the feeling of the notes. And what it is the beginnings of improvisation. And I think it's, although improvisation is a term generally used in association with blues or jazz music, it's good to be able to feel that you're connected to your instrument by your ear, that you're not dependent on having to play just by looking at music, and that if you hear a tune, you should be able to pick it up with your ear and play it. It's fun to do. Now, before moving on to the next scale that we're going to learn, perhaps a few words about how to go about practicing the fiddle. It's obviously important to just put in as much time as you can. The more time, the better. But the way that you allot that time is important too. It's good to practice every single day. It's far better, for instance, to practice if you can maybe get 20 minutes practice a day. That's great. Far better than, say, leaving it for 5 days and then trying to squash in, 2 or 3 hours practice. So it's the regularity of just moving the fingers, going over the motions, practicing the bow, doing all the stuff that we've done. That's very important. Obviously, you can play along with this video, but also I'd suggest that you play along with anything you like. Records are great teachers. I learned a lot of stuff from records, especially folk records. Folk tunes are wonderful tunes to learn. They also have the advantage on the fiddle of you can play them on their own. They don't need any accompaniment. You can play a tune like... And it's a little piece of music that exists on its own. You don't need a guitarist or a piano to accompany you. It sounds fine on its own. Now, you may notice when you practice that every now and then one of the strands of horsehair on the bow, they break. These things have to be re-haired. When one does break, I won't break one off now, but when one does break, you just carefully pull it off at either end, or even better, snip it off with a little pair of nail scissors or something. Because if you don't pull it out like that at either end, because that loosens the wedge that holds the hair in. So, depending on how much you play and how hard you play, a bow needs rehairing. Well, I have these rehaired about probably once a month, but of course I'm playing all the time. A bow rehair can easily last you 6 months. It just depends on the quality of the hair, how much you play, how hard you play. So, now we're ready to move on to our next scale. The next scale is going to be the scale of G major, and it's going to be a 2-octave scale. So it's twice the compass, twice the range of the scale of D major, which you now should be reasonably familiar with. This is the scale of G major over 2 octaves, and it takes us across all 4 strings. And back down. Now you notice I played that in 2 halves because a 2-octave scale is obviously 2 1-octave scales joined together, and that's a good way to think about it. So let's go through the G major scale in the same way as we did the D major scale, just discovering where we put our fingers. Now the first 8 notes will be quite straightforward to you once you've mastered the D major scale, because you're using exactly the same finger positions as you used for the D major scale, but on the bottom 2 strings. So if we just go through it, the open G string, the first finger down to get the note A, the second finger down to get the note B, the third finger down to get the note C, then fingers off for the open D string, first finger down for the note E, second finger down for the note F sharp, and third finger down for the note G, back to G. So we have the first octave of the G major scale. Fine. Now the second octave starts slightly differently because we're not, for the first time, we're not starting on an open string. We're starting on that third finger on the D string, which is the note G, to do the rest of the scale, this part of the scale. And this involves putting our fingers now in slightly different positions. So let's go through it. We're starting the second octave on the third finger on the D string with the note G. Then fingers off for the open A string. First finger down for the note B. This will be familiar to you already from the D major scale. But now there's a slight change for the next note, because whereas on the D major scale you put your finger here with a reasonable space between the first and second fingers, for this next note of C we are now putting the second finger close to the first finger. So we get this note. So just go from the open A string again. Open A string, first finger down for B, second finger close to the first finger for C, and then the gap now comes between the second and the third finger, in that way, for the note D. So A, B, C, D. And then we're nearly at the end of the scale now. We take the fingers off to play the open E string, and then the same thing as we just did on the A string, but with just these 2 fingers on the top string. So it's first finger down for an F sharp, and back to our top G, which is the second finger close to the first on the top string. So let's just play that scale slowly with alternating strokes of the bow. down. Remembering, of course, in the same way as you did on the D major scale, to try and keep all the fingers down as you use them. Don't be lifting them off as you're going through the scales. It's just economy of movement. You want to really move the fingers as little as possible because you use less energy, and it's a better and more relaxed way of playing. So, having got to this stage, you can now start, if you want, to just experiment a little with the ways that you play, these two scales that we've got. We've got the D major scale, we have the G major scale. And we've been doing all of these at the moment with just alternate bow strokes, down bows and up bows. You can start now to think about slurring the notes. That means that rather than playing each note with one bow stroke, you can play two notes with one bow stroke, like this. And back down. That's obviously quite a bit more difficult because it involves bow control, it involves moving from one string to another while the bow is actually in motion. So that's a bit more tricky. But you can build up this way of just varying the scales that you practice. You can do it with three notes per bow stroke. So all these variations just give you more skill and just ease at moving the bow across the strings. So there we have the scale of G major over 2 octaves, and now let's play a tune using that scale. So now we're going to learn to play a tune using all the notes that we've learned in the G major scale. Now, if by this time you've already started to familiarise yourself with music notation, you'll be able to follow it through, follow the music through, follow the dots through, the dots as we call them. If not, just go ahead and learn it by ear. Of course, the best thing to do is to learn it both ways. So you can play the tune by looking at the music, but on the other hand, you don't rely on the music to remember the tune, so you can just play it off the top of your head. So here's the tune, played very slowly and using nice, easy, long bow strokes, and again using a down bow and an up bow alternating. Now I've found that quite a good idea to, again, just get more ease of bow movement and to get used to the bow moving in the different directions and across the strings is to play exactly the same thing, but this time reverse the bowing. So instead of starting on a down bow, you start on an up bow. So all the string crossings and stuff like that is reversed, and this just gives you, again, more ease of using the bow. So let's play it at about the same speed, but starting with an up bow. So there you have a little dance tune. Now, up till now, everything that we've been playing has been played completely without expression, just playing the notes very straightforwardly. The next thing I'm going to explain to you is one of the most difficult things to explain. It's a very mysterious art of vibrato. Listen how this note changes as I firstly play it with no expression and then add vibrato. So you can see what vibrato does. It enables you to give the note expression, and it enables you to give the notes a singing quality. It's also one of the major things that contributes to you developing your individual sound and style on the fiddle. It is, however, one of the most difficult things to acquire, and it's also one of the most difficult things to explain. Really, it's best to just try and imitate what you see me doing. The motion comes from the wrist joint here, and the first thing to do to start practicing it is choose a note. I think probably the third finger is the easiest finger to start with. Let's choose the note G, which is the third finger on the D string. And just practice moving it slowly backwards and forwards. Not the most beautiful sound, but work on speeding it up gently and varying the speed of it. Until you get seasick and then stop and have a rest. Now, there is a good little trick that I can show you to make that practice easier. First of all, what you have to do is find a good solid wall. A good solid wall. Now let me stress, you do need a good solid wall. Try and avoid doors that are likely to be opened by people, and never under any circumstances try this against the emergency exit of an airliner. Now what we do, take the fiddle and place the end of it, the scroll as it's called, gently against the wall, and just lean into it. Not too hard, otherwise you'll snap it in half. Now, what this does is it just means that the fiddle is held absolutely rock solid. And this makes it a lot easier to just concentrate completely on the wrist movement that you need to practice vibrato. It really does make it easier. You can just concentrate on that movement. Now we've just used so far this third finger. Start using the other fingers. It's useful to point out here as well that we've been talking about keeping the fingers down as we play scales. When you get onto vibrato, it helps the vibrato to very slightly raise the other fingers, to just give the finger that's actually doing the vibrato room to move. So let's try doing a G major scale and vibratoing the notes. Now you've probably noticed that there is a certain problem when it comes to applying vibrato to an open string, because you're not actually fingering it. So how can you put vibrato to it? Well, if you're feeling a bit ambitious at this stage and are thinking that your fourth finger has been rather idle, perhaps now is the time to try it out. Because if we take our position on each string where the third finger is, and then put the fourth finger above it about there, we get the same note as the open string next up. So listen. Same note. Play the two same notes at once if you want. So, using the fourth finger, you can substitute it in your scales for the open strings. And also you can start to practice doing it with vibrato. So you could practice a scale of G major, for instance, like this. So there we have it, vibrato. We're now going to learn a different type of scale. We're going to learn a type of scale called a minor scale. And the scales that we've learnt up to now have been called major scales. Now, simply put, the difference between a major and a minor scale is that a major scale has quite an open, happy feel to it. A minor scale or a minor chord has a sad feel. That's very simply put. The main distinguishing feature between a minor scale and a major scale is the third note in the scale. Whereas we've been playing the third note, let me use the scale that we learnt of D major, the third note was raised. Now, in a minor scale, that note is flattened. So instead of sounding like this, it sounds like this. See, that made me a bit sad just playing it. Now, it's quite complicated to explain about scales, and I'd strongly recommend you go out and get one of the many books that you can get with scale exercises in them. As far as minor scales are concerned, there are lots of different sorts of minor scales. So we're just going to deal with one particular type, which is a scale called the Dorian. It's actually called the Dorian mode. A mode is really just another word for scale. And the Dorian mode is a mode or a scale that appears a great deal in folk music. And we're going to play the Dorian mode, or the Dorian scale, starting on D And first we'll just play it in one octave. This is very similar to the scale of D major that we played, the first scale that we learned, just using the center two strings. But this time, the finger positions that we use, the same on both strings, and the finger position is the one that we used on the A string when we were playing the G major scale. So the finger positions, we'll go through them. Open D, first finger down for the note E, second finger close to it for the note F, third finger for the note G, open A string, first finger down for the note B, second finger close for the note C, and third finger for the note D. So the whole scale. Back down. Now we're going to play a tune that uses the Dorian mode or the Dorian scale, but we're going to use notes that fall outside the range, outside the compass of just those middle two strings. So although the complete one octave scale will just appear on the middle two strings, we're going to use notes in the scale that appear on the bottom string and the top string. So I'll go through it now, starting from the bottom G string and showing you all the notes that appear in the Dorian mode and how we finger them. You'll be, by now, familiar with nearly all the positions, although when we get to the top string, there will be a new finger position for you to learn. So, firstly, the open G. First finger down for A. Second finger in its raised position for B. Third finger close to it for C. Now come the notes that we just did. Open D string. First finger down for E. Second finger close to it for F. Third finger for G. Open A string. First finger down for B. Second finger close to it for C. The third finger for the D. Open E string. And now we come to the new finger position. This is the first finger, but instead of appearing here with a little gap between it and the end of the string, we move it back. So it's right close to this, which is called the nut of the fiddle, where the strings pass over. The nut. We slide that finger back. So this is a note F, and it appears like this. So from the open E string, first finger in that backward position for F, then a little gap bringing us up to the G note that we've been familiar with already, and then one note higher than we've actually been so far, which is an A, which is the regular third finger position that we know. And that takes us through the Dorian mode with the main scale appearing in the middle and the extra notes at either end of the scale. I'll just play it at slightly brisker tempo for you so you can hear how it sounds. So those are the notes in first position, which you'll remember I talked about first position being when you're just playing in this position on the neck rather than venturing up to it, which is something that comes a bit later. Those are the notes of the Dorian mode in first position, which we can now use to play this tune. So here's a tune using the notes that we've learned in the Dorian mode or Dorian scale. Now, this tune is not only different in that respect, that it's in a minor scale, but also it's in a different time signature. And by time signature, I mean how we count the rhythm of the music. The previous tunes we've played have been in 4/4, which means that we count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, like that. This one is in 3/4, so we count it 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. It's kind of like a waltz if you want to think of it like that. Again, follow the notation and learn it by ear. Do the both, and here it is. A tune in the Dorian mode in 3/4. And there you have it. You're well on your way to being a fiddle player. Now there's lots of stuff on this video for you to go over and over until you've mastered it, until you feel confident. So just practice a lot, play as much as you can, listen to as many different styles of music as you can, play as many styles as you can, and for instance you could go back to the shop and show that chap how you're getting on. By now you'll probably need some new strings and a bow rehair. And above all, have a good time, enjoy yourself, have fun playing the fiddle. And speaking of fun, I'm going to finish off by showing you some of the fun that you can have by plugging the fiddle in to a few electronic devices. Here we go.
Thank you.